Um, very delighted to be invited to this college because I have come without invitation many times. And whenever I came, somehow I could manage to enter this college because I was talking with the principal that this college is such that it naturally, like the way you have mentioned, it attracts a lot of people. I'm grateful for me to be invited here. I told you that. And I have, so many images to show you. Why have we chosen so many images? For the reason that I don't have to talk much. That's one of the real reasons. Well, I'm talking about these two characters. I mean, she already mentioned about these two characters, MUSUI and MAIYA. This is where I went to Shantiniketan. This is the campus, Kalabhavan campus. Kalabhavan is the art faculty of the MUSUI University. It's an exciting campus, so familiar, so intimate kind of a scale that we have. It's one of the old tree that was planted during the time of Tagore. He had, normally he brought all kinds of different trees from different countries whenever he traveled to. So this is a China, this has come from China, so China boat they call it. It's a center character of the campus. It's a mural done by K.G. Subramaniam, one of the very important artists and an educator, who was a student of Shantiniketan. And this also by him, the whole building it used to be the studio of Nandalal Bose. And that has been, it's covered with the mural made in ceramics. So when I went to Shantiniketan in 1974, I met with some of the important people, like some of the important masters. One was Ramkinkar Beg. And this is one of the sculptures, very famous. It's called Santal Family. It was done in 1938 when Ramkinkar was just 32 years old. And you get to see a lot of sculptures of Ramkinkar. And Ramkinkar passed away in 1980. And 2 years before he passed away, I had the opportunity to do a portrait of him. He sat for me. So I did this portrait, which is in different places in museums and all. Another teacher that we mentioned about is Professor Sharbari Roy Chaudhary. I was very, very close to him. I worked with him for many years. And he worked on, extremely contrast to what has been happening, what the kind of works that Ramkinkar made. The much biggest monumental sculptures of Ramkinkar on one side, and then you have the miniature sculptures of Sharbari. Sharbari did many series of portraits of different musicians. This is Ali Akbar Khan sitting for Sharbari and Bede Ghulam Ali Khan. And this is the centenary year of another great master called Somnath Ho, whose exhibition I have just completed curating the exhibition, which the exhibition is on in Kolkata. He has done a very large mural in Kalabhavan campus. Well, I went to, I had the opportunity to work with Somnath Ho when I created this woodcut. That was one of the first work that I have done in Shantiniketan. Shantiniketan, when you call it, well, it's a place. But we have the Vishwabharati University is sort of housed within that. So around the Vishwabharati University or Shantiniketan, it has many villages, tribals, Santals and many other villages. So you can see people working on the roadside making this jaggery and all kinds of small scale works, The atmosphere is very village, very much like a village. And for me, it was very comfortable from Kugimattam, Kottayam, from there to Shantiniketan, because I could connect myself very easily with that place. These are all, you get to see kind of an environment which is extremely rural and, like red footpaths and things like that. I mean, it's a kind of a place like you have open space. The philosophy of the education system itself was initiated and by the visionary Tagore For him, this transparency, this sort of being in a place which has no boundaries. One of the days, I was sort of coming from one of the villages to the university, and I happened to have seen this young boy standing by the roadside. I asked him, he gave me a kind of a smile. That was the real thing to start with. I asked him, well, what excited you? I mean, he was just asking the other routine. He was begging with a smile. So I asked him, well, what exactly are you sort of, then he was not answering anything. He wanted bread. So I made him sit behind my cycle and took him to the department. So he posed for me as a model. I did a portrait. And I must have given him some few coins, some little. And he left. After an hour or so, he comes back to me. And then I looked at him. He's totally changed. He has come with the first earnings that he comes back to me as a kind of a bald-headed, the first thing that he went to a barber shop to have his head shaven. And then I made a life-size sculpture of MUSUI. And of course, this MUSUI, when I asked him, he told me my name is MUSUI. And MUSUI is the word probably stands, it's a tribal name, it's a Santhal boy. I made the life-size sculpture. Later when I left for Delhi after my completion of studies, I couldn't actually take the entire sculpture. And that was a cast in plaster or something like that. So I chopped up the head, and then I could not, instead of the whole figure, I took this portrait with me to Delhi. So he has become a kind of a permanent fixture in my studio. And this was the studio where I shifted in 1993 near Kottayam, Delhi. And MUSUI was always, that portrait was always kept very safe in my custody. And MUSUI was always there with me, but then I have been very busy with my own kind of sculptures which I have been engaged with. This is a sculpture installed in India Habitat Center. Well, we have Vijay is here. The sculpture was done in CERT campus. And that is an invitation from the architect Radhakrishnan, and we spent 1 month to work on this sculpture, and later it has become casted into bronze and installed in India Habitat Center. There are two sculptures. One is a Chandala rider. The other one was a woman sitting on a split base. And this was installed in, from 93, 94 onwards, I was installing many sculptures in Europe. This is again in the south of France. Some of the large monumental sculptures I happen to have done in the south of France for the reason that there was a sponsor. And also in India, to find a buyer those years in 1980s, it was not easy. So obviously one had to naturally either choose outside the country or to look for some commissions in India. These are the sculptures from those periods of 1980s. Then later I made them into a larger scale. The sculpture is titled The Pool. When I did a one-man show in 1993 in Paris, that's the time that, unless you do something very good in the other countries, you don't get any recognition. So if you do anything, whatever you do back home is, much later after what you do outside. So this was one of the exhibition that was happening in Europe, and then the review came in India with a full page. They started talking about, the sculptor, Indian sculptor, hold a one-man show in Paris and this and that. But when you do, even before that, if you do something back home, you have to wait for a long time. Sculpture was exhibited in Kolkata. This was the time ITC has this international travel house in Delhi asked me if I could do a piece for their, terrace. And the subject was given to me was travel. So when you talk about travel, what is that came to my mind was like somebody carrying somebody like a rickshaw puller, especially coming from Kolkata. So I did this small model and then I made a much larger for the rooftop, the real size sculpture. While working on this sculpture, I was just thinking who should be the person carrying this rickshaw. Then probably I had to sort of recheck with MUSUI. MUSUI could be one of the person who could be doing that. So that's where the MUSUI comes to my sculpture, even though his portrait was very much with me in the studio. So he almost like kind of a dialogue that would you? Yes, I'm ready to be doing that. And it was so big that I could sit on the rickshaw. I think that was the time when I met Johnny. 1996. Johnny came to interview me, I suppose, from Malayalam he was working for. And once I sat with him behind MUSUI, I don't know whether I could still get down off that rickshaw. I'm still sort of seated next to him or behind him or whatever. The journey starts from there. Then I started working on some small sculptures as models. So while working on MUSUI as a subject, a person who I could connect myself with, I felt the story gets completed only after having conceived the counterpart of MUSUI, who is a kind of a takeoff from MUSUI itself, adding certain feminine character to MUSUI to make it and then I call her MAIYA. So MUSUI and MAIYA has become inseparable, integrated characters. I continue to be working for commissions and orders for whatever the space that I have found outside the country, especially south of France and other countries. And this is a site, where there's a palm grove. I was told to be working on a sculpture, so I started working on these impish characters because, there are stories connected always with Panayam Chatanam. The kind of stories which were connected from the childhood. So I really connected with this palm grove and the MUSUIs are becoming impish characters. The kind of impish characters are extremely generating movement from within, which has to be naturally expressed with their own body language. They are all put together to form a kind of a collective. That was the time when I was sort of very much interested in the film which is the Radhakrishnan's Kottayam. Adur was a close friend for the reason that he came to Shantiniketan and we had a kind of a communication. So I was following his work. And this Kottayam, where himself, the main character himself is within the trap and not realizing that the rest of the things are only trapped. I keep doing all kinds of airbound lightness to be created with the kind of characters. So here is a guy who is sort of happy catching a rat. So the MUSUI becomes a rat catcher and she becomes a writer, the counterpart. So I was working on this series of these characters together simultaneously, just to be sort of working, juxtaposed characters. So she comes from elsewhere to be a writer. And she's a creature, also become Jesus. And I remember when I made this Jesus, this was first bought by the Bombay bishop, and that is kept in the main church. So also he becomes the devil. Why can't she be a violinist? And maybe a Brahmin who is worshipping sun, a Mullah Nasruddin. And she becomes a graduate here because holding this Eglam Bala, the Chatim in Bengali in Chatim, and the Shapta Parni if you call it, we have those trees here also, I suppose. So that's the kind of relief that is given to a student who is an outgoing student from Shantiniketan. So she is a graduate. The sculpture is installed in Kamala Nehru College and in the open air space. You know, she is holding on to a kind of a vertical member, a column, horizontally well placed, and she is on the crest of a wave, and Kalamandala MUSUI. You know why only characters? She can be a windmill, and also both of them becomes windmills and installed in south of France. Yet, you know, these two characters are holding each other's head, just to establish the fact that they are very, very conceived to be two different halves, but to be together to become one. They are for the first time being placed on a same platform. She is an angel, also a Raj. And she becomes Mona Lisa, also a tree goddess. They are standing with these two characters are standing on the railing with my sponsors on the other side. The kind of character is conceived to be that you can really be walking on the edge of the water. And here MAIYA becomes an arrow and the bow. Ambum Villu Aganna Uru MAIYA and whatever character. Ambu Ana Villu Ana. So what happens to that? The idea was later, bigger scale I created in Shantiniketan. This is the house of Tagore. Well, you know, normally when we create a sculpture, we create a kind of a space that's sort of giving scope to think about it. A thinking space that we create, not necessarily that we have answers for everything. Because why she is that, or why not this? So, but I think people really sort of take a kind of a look at it in detail to find out what could be the idea that could be possibly explored in that. That one has to leave it to their own background, I suppose. So they come together, a kind of a joining many figures to put together to become a human globe. The sculpture for the first time installed in Delhi government asked me, since I have been working for other countries and other foundations, they approached me if I could do a sculpture for the government. There's a garden of 5 senses in Delhi, for which I have done something on the rock. Yeah, the sculptures are normally becoming bigger and larger than myself, and I'm so happy that few of the sculptures are coming back home, because doing always outside the country is not that's what I wanted. You know, that was the time when I shifted to a colony called Mehroli, which was just a kind of a colony that was upcoming. A lot of population, a lot of people coming from migrants, coming from different states looking for job. A colony called Chhatrapur Pahadi. And you could see that from the rooftop, I could see people are just gathering for water, resources, basic. And that was the time when I started working on very tiny figures. Hundreds of tiny figures, like 3 inches. I casted very broad sculptures. I put them together the way I want it to be, with different kind of geometrical shapes, and I call it human boxes. And they are into all kinds of primary forms. They get into the vessels. The vessel into that, and also to be sort of reverted back. A kind of a global integration. The idea was sort of becoming that people are flowing from one place to the next, always on the move. See, these tiny figures, they don't have a feature of their own. They are just sort of unidentified, anonymous characters getting into MUSUI's head and MAIYA's head. And here they start walking together. MUSUI and MAIYA, the sculpture size is a bit small, maybe around 13 inches. So there are 5 of them to become 6 and to turn into 10. And then they become a huge crowd. And I have to really mention my friend Prabhupada Dasgupta, who is a very famous photographer, who is no more. And he was one of the person I really depended on him for some of the best of the photographs of my sculptures. I had some very good writers on one side, and I had this special sensitive photographer on one side. Among some of the, Johnny has written a lot about my work. I'm so happy that he's here. And this is a sculpture, sort of, the same sculpture is viewed from the aerial view of the ramp. In the middle of the ramp, you have a kind of a saint standing in the middle of it, much larger than life size, become Radhakrishnan. And the Sharda, the counterpart, the MAIYA becomes Sharda, seated on a different kind of a ramp. So put together, those two ramps are put together to form an integral collective concept. Coming back from Egypt, I have conceived this goddess, guardian goddess, standing in the middle of, you can see that MAIYA becomes a kind of a Selkit, it's a kind of a character that is specifically a guardian goddess. The sculpture was exhibited at different places. So, with all that is happening on one side, I still keep going to Shantiniketan, and I see MUSUI still working the tea shop. So that here the MUSUI and MAIYAs become freehold characters. They are on the crest of the pillars of different movement. It's not any kind of, not drawing from any movement from the real world, instead creating a kind of a movement from within. Sometimes they are with a very minimum contact with the pillar. She becomes a writer here. A writer keeps happening to my subject very well. The one sculpture that I am doing also for CMS College is also a writer. And again, this is in Baroda. I think Karan Grover is the architect. We have installed a large sculpture of the writer. So this freehold series of these sculptures are, basically, if one wants to talk about one specific idea of a sculpture, can really be continued. But I am just sort of running the images for the reason that later, if there is some time, we can have an interaction if you want to. So I'm just showing all these movements because I kept on working on a series of sculptures, and when I have enough, then I put them together to a kind of an form an exhibition. Almost 2 years, 3 years that you work, then you come out to the public with the kind of an exhibition either in Bombay or in other cities. So the MAIYA carrying a boat full of people, and she is holding a home. Instead of going home, she is carrying a home. And the MUSUI with a kind of, what you call it, palm leaf, which is very regularly seen in Kerala. So he becomes a turtle. Also, he decides to look at, or she decides to look at the mirror and then found himself or herself. Instead that, we're seeing the counterpart on the other side. So crossing the void of all these characters together. And here is one of the sculpture which I really did. A lot of people below. There is a large vertical structure on which there is a MUSUI taking an aerial view of what's happening on the ground. And the sculpture has been made big, installed in Shantiniketan, Kalabhavan. So by the time when I'm sort of doing all that, when I'm involved with, hundreds of these tiny people are getting cast, and then they become the middle of the people. They really join to all kinds of different directions. Working with the copper material as such, getting into home, sort of journey through, waves, inserted sometime in the middle of a human web, and also the MUSUI, a kind of an abstract MUSUI inside, inserted inside the human. Could be like a smoke, maybe a kind of a little breeze, the light. But how do you give light and things that are not tactile? How to give a form to that was my challenge. Puttukutti. Yeah, it's a kind of a steam that comes up with the Puttukutti and Matula, the other kind of different vessels that you can see steam and smoke and things like that. And maybe Chotu Patram, so you can just feel the heat of it. Adupum Chattim and Idali Kuttagam, Idali Kuttagam. And maybe a fan that really gives a kind of a generated space, This was soon after the Kerala flood, that the water comes to the level much above the building, and the boat has come to the water level when the house is inside. The torch light, the rubber plant, you can just have, that chopping up the rubber. And then, of course, the childhood that you always had, I always studied with this randal. And then you have all these kind of things that surround. Because people, any of this comes naturally to us, right? This you can see that, after especially monsoon, you can see the eel. Yeah, that naturally comes to. So it's an ephemera. It basically comes to the light and they lose their life. So ephemera has become a major idea for me to be connecting with the people who could not make it from the European countries or African countries to the West. So they get sunk, the boats are getting sunk on the way. So this has become a major installation for me. Some of the details of that. And they all want to reach out to the light, but don't make it. Normally not. So this ascending and descending, that has become an important subject for me. By the time I go to Shantanika, then I get to see MUSUI again. But he starts sort of becoming almost like me. Like graying and, So, I have always kept my contact with MUSUI. Then I started working on another project that I took to myself. It's a large, long, very ground-specific sculpture called the Liminality. Hundreds and hundreds of these people are being cast into bronze, and the studio was. I didn't know where to stop. I just thought maybe let my studio be filled with figures. That's where I should stop. There was no more scope to do that. So creating that sculpture to end with, or to start with, there's a pillar, there's a horizontal MAIYA. Get guardrailed to different pillars to come to the last point of that. I think it's almost 50 feet long, large. Probably the largest sculpture I ever made is this. So it's basically coming to the end of the sculpture that you would see a wall that has the reflection of the last figure. And also the reflection and also the shadow that is getting merged with sort of specifically say that it is just not the end of it, maybe something for one sort of a space to start with. They're taking kind of a new beginning. The sculpture is displayed in different places. I remember it is displayed in Travancore, Kanagakunna Palace, that was exhibited in Toronto. Sculpture was probably very well because it's 2.5 years I took to complete this sculpture. It's probably one of the largest I ever made. But kept on working with the individual figures and taking different heights, taking off at a kind of much higher level. Just when I was invited to Calicut, where I was told that I could be making a sculpture in a kind of a camp. The sculpture, it was a very big challenge politically because to do a sculpture, and I chose Mananjara. Mananjara Maidan is not an easy site. It's a very politically, very activated space in Mananjara. But they really said, if I can convince the people in Calicut, I could probably be doing a sculpture there. But how to convince the public, it's very difficult. Because one, it was a very well maintained garden, and also from the MP, the council, municipal council. So all of them agreed to the fact that, a sculpture will come up in Mananjara. So I had no other option other than working in the middle of the night. The sculpture was installed in the night because the public may really interrupt with your intentions. So all these large granite stones from different places, it has come to the ground. Probably I started working at 11 o'clock and I finished at 5 o'clock in the morning. Of course, the Maidanam was disturbed. It was so much grass, well maintained. And next day I was watching what would be the reaction of the people. So I could see some people are slowly coming into the park. And I was seeing from distance. Because what would be the kind of reaction? I had no clue. And on the ground I wanted this, the tiles, the mangrove tiles to be carved. But I can't make it in bronze on the ground because bronze people have a tendency to be sort of taking it off or whatever, to be sort of sold to the market or whatever. So I found that people are standing next to my sculpture and taking photographs. That was a very big acceptance for me. Because if somebody takes a selfie or a group photograph next to a sculpture means slowly getting into the system. So after that, prior to that you can see there is concrete. On the concrete that I have placed the, stone, granite stone and the bronze MUSUI. As the MUSUI is depicted as time. Kala Pravaham, that was the title, time tides. So that concrete get inserted into the soil. So I created a mound. So you see only the stone. And the sculpture is there for a long time, I'm sure. Once I saw in the newspaper a photograph of my sculpture where 3 people are standing on my bronze and cleaning it. I think that it's fantastic, it's encouraging because whatever the pro does, they get cleaned. The sculptures are very big before I started working for the Behurupi. And those 3 large Behurupi sculptures were brought to Kottayam. 3 of them together. I put them at the children's park here in Shastri Road. I think now it's open to the public. The sculpture is very big. This is also granite. It's different scale of stone at different height, and it's there. Each sculpture is very, very large and heavy bronzes. The same sculpture is sort of sold in one of the corporates in Bangalore, because I make my money by selling to the rich people, rich corporates, and part of that money I take it for doing sculptures that I can afford to give to the people, place that I like. That's the way I function. In Goa, I was told to do a sculpture. I started working on the mangrove tiles, kind of a home. Then the sculpture was cast in Jaipur. It's also one of the major sculptures of mine. It has come to Goa next to the promenade of the Mandavi River. The sculpture is, the whole building is bronze. That you could see the scale of it next to the river. And well, the sculpture is there. I'm sure it's going to be there forever. Even if they want to remove, they have to spend equal amount of money. And this is something I did during the Corona time. The Supreme Court of India asked me if I can do a sculpture for their new building. I mean, I normally do a sculpture when there is nobody else is asked to do it. Otherwise, if there's no competition or anything, that I never get into one of those. The sculpture was a big challenge to be placed in the middle of the water. It's hundreds and hundreds of MUSUIs and MAIYAs to create a kind of a flourishing tree. I mean, that's what the constitution is meant to be, but whether it's true or not. Constitution, the flourishing tree that you can read if you, maybe within a minute you can read. Well, looking into the details of that tree, that you can see all kinds of movements are put together, all the people are put together, of different scale, not the same size. This was again Corona time, people were ascending and descending. Here you can see one of the subtle characters that are, few people are trying to uplift, certain people are trying to save. Well, horizontally placed figure. That is the sad times of the life. Well, I don't know. I'm engaged with some other works which are meant to be exhibited in the coming time. In January in Calcutta, I'm going to have it exhibited. So, well, I could see that people are still with open eyes. They could really look at my sculpture. I thank you so much for your patience, and happy to be here. And if you want to have any questions regarding connected to my sculptures, because anything about my life, I don't know how much I can describe about, but anything connected to the work, maybe I can. Thank you so much.